You know, a buddy of mine years and years ago, probably 20 years ago, turned me on to a book called The Secret Life of Plants.
Yeah,
and so that book is just like, you know, maybe you don't have to read it all the way through to get the point, because it kind of gets boring after a while.
It's a little dry.
It's so scientific, but obviously, like, every living thing is interconnected in some way and vibe, and like how a plant is reacting to its owner being in a car wreck 3,000 miles away, like a plant is connected with the people that are caring for it in that kind of level. But the name Talking Trees for my cannabis farm came from one of my employees, actually, because, you know, when you have a farm, you usually like have different plots and you have names for those plots. And so on the farm, we had the extra credit because it wasn't great sun. There was a lot of trees, and it was like on the northern side of the slope. So up an extra credit, she was just up there gardening, and like literally when the wind blows, the trees just like they start talking, basically. It gets super loud up there, just the movement of the trees. And so she went to set up a account at one of the local grocery stores down there in Willow Creek, and they're like, "Oh, what do you want the account name to be?" And she's like, "Talking Trees." And I was like, "That's an awesome name." You just named the brand.
I love
and
that.
So yeah, it's got a little history up on the hill from the gardening spot, and then one of my.
I love that you mentioned that about your property, because I was up there a couple years ago, and that was something that I felt was really unique and really stuck out, was that there's several different gardens and they all have their own vibe and their own thing going on. Yeah. Like almost like completely separate farms in some way, you know. But
well, that's how it was set up back in the day, because you're thinking about them flying over and you want to make it as spread out as possible, which now it fucking sucks. You gotta drive 2 miles from one garden to the other, you know. It's a lot of time in a day, but back in the day you wanted it as spread out as possible so they wouldn't think it was one farm and come and bust you.
Sure.
So that legacy, I'm kind of stuck with the spread out plots on the property.
That's history.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's one thing that's really affecting a lot of the legacy farmers, is how you had to do it at the time, how they required you to do it as you entered the legalized market and the permitted reality. They wanted it to stay where it was so you could get, you know, pre-existings, right? And now those same things that they drove so hard, they're kind of going the opposite direction and trying to move things closer to town and making it so much more difficult for these legacy farmers to function in a competitive environment. And I find that really disheartening for a lot of people that have these, you know, infrastructure issues now, because they were playing the game the way it was supposed to be played at the time, and they changed the rules so fast and kind of really just left some of those legacy people behind. And you know, we've talked about this with some of the other folks, and we were talking with Tim and Taylor Blake about this, how you used to need to be 3 hours from town, 6 miles up a dirt road behind 9 gates. And now, like, how do you get labor up there? How do you afford to compete in a competitive product market when you have all these extra infrastructure costs? How are farmers like yourselves kind of fighting those battles?
I mean, it's just the reality. You got to deal with those issues. But I mean, if we could, it'd be great to be closer to town and not have to be so far up the dirt roads and back. But you can't move, like, depending on the zoning of your property. And the way it was all initiated, it's like, okay, well, if you were going balls to the wall and going for it while it was illegal, now you're rewarded because you can go that big now. When a lot of people were being like, "Oh, I just want to keep it simple. I don't want to get busted." Yeah. But now you're screwed when it comes to legalization. Based on the zoning of your property, you can't expand. You can't, you know. So it's kind of unfair, but and ironic that the more illegal you were, the better off you are now in legalization. And they did give everybody a window if you are in those, you know, super remote locations and your TPZ. You know, you had 2 years to get on board, and I think a lot of people were just too hesitant and nervous about the whole thing, that they might have waited too long, and kind of, unfortunately, are kind of getting left to the dust in a way. But, you know, we've been doing this, taking chances about getting busted for over 20 years. So it's like, well, now you got the chance to not get busted. You should probably have taken it. But, you know.
That's a really good point. You know, the whole backbone of this thing is taking risks. Yeah. And you're right. There's a lot of people that weren't able to cross over to that level of risk taking when it comes to actually signing up and putting your name and address, you know, into the authorities' hands. That was something that just wasn't feasible for a lot of people.